Hi everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And my first question this week comes from Matthew Webb, who has a nice, straightforward, easily answered question that goes like this. Syria, to attack or not to attack? That is the question. Thanks for that one, Matthew. I am of three minds about Syria. The first part of me is the part of me that doesn't like it when my country bombs other countries. So that part of me says absolutely not. Don't do anything. Don't it's not our business. Don't send planes and bombs, and for God's sake don't send troops. Just no. Then there's the part of me that really doesn't like autocrats who abuse and murder their own people. And that part of me says, let's go over there and kick Assad's ass and remove this awful, brutal bully from power, because men like him do not deserve to have this kind of political and military power. We should take him out of that situation, which is not the mission, by the way. I realize that. But that is certainly the goal, ultimately. As Secretary Kerry said, the goal is for Assad, to encourage Assad to voluntarily step down. So the goal essentially is to get rid of him. And there's a part of me that is very sympathetic to that. But then there's the third part that comes in, and that's the more pragmatic part that reminds the other two parts of me. I really do have a shattered psyche in this analogy, don't I? It reminds the other two parts of me that there are lots and lots of dictators and autocrats all over the world that are bullying and oppressing and murdering their own people at this very moment. In the Middle East, in Africa, it is by far a problem that is not unique to Syria. And if we're going to intervene in Syria, why have we not done so in the African conflicts? Why did we not do so? Why have we not done something about Kim Jong-un in North Korea and the horrible oppression that those people are undergoing? It's just a purely pragmatic recognition that a lot of the world really sucks, and a lot of the people of the world have been forced to suffer horrible, horrible, horrible oppression as a result of their government. And it's not necessarily our job to do anything about that. And it's not necessarily good for us to make it our job to do anything about that. So I honestly can tell you that the best answer is I have no fucking idea. And I am glad that it's not up to me. Liam J., you said porn was inherently sexist. Could you elaborate? I agree that a good deal of it is demeaning and somewhat anti-woman, but how is it inherently sexist? What about female-friendly porn? Lots of commenters have been arguing with me about how I said porn is inherently sexist in last week's lightning round, and they're right. What I should have said was that porn is predominantly sexist. It's not inherently sexist, because as others pointed out, there is gay porn where it's guy on guy and girl on girl, and it's a little tricky to say that is inherently sexist. As far as female-friendly porn, what little of it I've seen, the female-friendly porn is still pretty guy-friendly too, if you know what I'm saying. So, but you're right, and those of you who disagreed with me about that, I admit that you're right on that, and I was wrong to call it inherently sexist. I would, if I could say that again, I would say predominantly sexist. Bass bait. Okay, here's my question. I don't really care what people's definition of a nerd or geek is, but it seems that having a lot of affection for or knowledge of something gets you labeled as a nerd. But do you think that acting on these things in a productive way could make you no longer a nerd? I mean, say for example, you're really nerdy about film like I am, but you use that knowledge to make a great film or even a great essay on film. At what point do you stop being a nerd? Is nerdiness defined by the uselessness of one's emotional or intellectual energy for something, or by the mere existence of said energy? And should anybody care anyways? I think you hit the nail on the head at the end there, Bassbait. There really isn't a reason anybody should care. If you have an interest that other people consider you a nerd for having that interest, but it makes you happy and you're happy with who you are and you're not hurting anybody with what you're doing, who gives a fuck? If people say that you're a nerd or what, I mean, really, you shouldn't care. Who gives a shit? I do think that you're right that the uselessness of it is part of maybe what draws that line between someone who would be like a very well-informed person about a subject and someone who's just a nerd about a subject. I think you're right. I mean, my wife calls me a Star Trek nerd, and I suppose I am, but I'm not what most people think of in their mind as a Star Trek nerd when they picture one. I mean, I've never been to a con ever. I've never wanted to go to one. I've never dressed up like a Star Trek character. I don't like line up for midnight screenings of the new movies or anything like that. I mean, I'm not preoccupied with it. I've seen a lot of it, and I have a pretty good memory for stuff like that, for film and television. So I've seen a lot of Star Trek, and I remember a lot about it. So, I mean, if we start talking Star Trek, I can probably rattle off a lot of stuff about it and be pretty correct in the things I'm saying. But it's not something that really means a lot to me from a day-to-day basis, and it's not something that I feel a great, emotional response to, where I see it as something fun and interesting and kind of frivolous, and that's the extent of it. I think the level of preoccupation, maybe, in addition to the uselessness of the knowledge or the interest, the not doing anything with the interest that you mentioned in your question, it's also an unhealthy level of preoccupation, where you're not only someone who knows a lot about Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever your thing is. It's not just that you know a lot about it. It's not just that you really like it. It's that you take it so seriously and you're so immersed in it that you have a hard time viewing it thoughtfully, and you have a hard time reacting to people who don't like it, or who have honest criticisms of it, or who just don't agree with you about something about it in a thoughtful and intelligent and adult way. I think that's part of it too. If you're going to draw that line between someone who just knows a lot about something and someone who is a nerd about something, maybe that's where you can draw the line, where it becomes like a really consuming and very self-serving kind of preoccupation. I don't know. Ural666, what do you think about the claim that Jesus is derived from other myths or shares properties with other gods? Is it even true? Because I'm getting mixed messages from the net about it. But if it was true, it would be a really good proof that the Jesus story is a story. Well, I think that the Jesus stories in the New Testament are probably largely legendary, or at least very, very much embellished by legend and exaggeration. I think there probably was a historical Jesus, so I don't think he's completely the product of myth. But I do think that a lot of the mythical aspects of his story that have grown up, that we find in the New Testament, match what are called mythic universals. And you can look this up on the internet. There are books written about this. And the mythic universals is the concept that even in cultures that aren't connected to each other, that couldn't have influenced each other, their myths, their mythic heroes particularly, will tend to have things in common with each other. Unusual births are very common. Unusual circumstances of death, returning from death, having unique powers in their life, coming from a humble background and rising to a place of great prominence. There are just really general sort of things that we find throughout history and throughout the various cultures of the world. And Jesus lines up with a lot of those very closely. And that indicates that that his story is of the same type as these other stories, that his story has some very strongly mythical elements. Most real people, real established historical figures, score very, very low when you compare their lives to these mythic universals. And the historical figures that we know of that do have stories about their lives that line up with these mythic universals are figures like Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar, about whom we know, in addition to the established real history of their lives, also have a great deal of legend and exaggeration and embellishment that has been invented around their real lives. So I think Jesus is probably a case like that. Mooney Kate, can you define feminism, or at least your view of it? I don't think some of your commentators get it. Feminism to me is, first, it's the recognition that gender inequality is a real thing in our culture, and that the nature of that inequality is that women are in a inferior position to men, and that it is desirable to reduce and, if possible, eliminate that inequality by bringing women up to the level of men, by encouraging equal portrayals of them in culture, by reducing legal discrimination against women, all sorts of things. Feminism is the recognition of gender inequality and the recognition that the inequality is the lower status of women, and then the goal and the effort of raising women culturally, changing the treatment of women, changing the perception of women, removing any barriers to achievement that block women, to eliminate that inequality so that women and men are on the same level. That, in a very general sense, is what I mean when I say feminism, and that is the sort of feminist that I consider myself. Cheeky Vimto 08, here's my question. How does Batman and Superman make a good storyline? Superman is ridiculously superpowered, and then Batman's just got a bunch of gadgets. I like Batman, it just seems difficult to make Batman seem relevant next to some super alien. It makes me think of Angel Summoner and the BMX Bandit from Mitchell and Webb. Oh, Batman is the BMX Bandit. I love it. Wouldn't Robert Webb be a good Batman? I think it has to focus on the personalities. You can't. You have to write a plot that allows the personalities to come through. And to me, as a comic book fan, that relationship between Superman and Batman is one of the best things in all of superhero comics. I just love that dynamic. I love the conflict and also the friendship between them. I just think there's so much to do there. There's so much potential for story there. And once you orient yourself to focus on the two of them as characters, honestly, I don't think that the plotting is that difficult. Because for one thing, you don't, for a Superman story to be good, he doesn't have to be saving the world or saving the universe every single time. Yes, he has powers that enable him to do amazing, incredible things. But there have been many, many wonderful character-based Superman stories where the conflict comes from personal conflict between Superman and a villain, or from within Superman himself. And the stakes are more emotional stakes and personal stakes, and not so much, well, if Superman fails, the world, civilization as we know it will crumble. That doesn't have to be every single Superman story. And even though this might be heresy to say this to a studio executive, it doesn't have to be the story for a Superman movie either, especially if one of the other characters is Batman. You can make a big budget, blockbuster, tentpole Batman and Superman movie in a way that serves both characters and puts them in situations that allows them to interact in really interesting and intriguing ways without having a story where, as you say, it would be like the Angel Summoner and the BMX Bandit, where only Superman could possibly do any good and Batman is just kind of sitting there, like Scarlett Johansson in the Avengers, just shooting people with a pistol while the Hulk is fucking pulling motherfuckers out of the sky. It doesn't have to be quite that extreme. It can focus on the personalities, and that's what I would do if I was writing it. Patrick Dodds, Steve, do you have a favorite mixed bag filmmaker, i.e. a filmmaker whose work is wildly inconsistent, but when they're good, they knock it out of the park, and when they suck, it creates a singularity? Mine are John Carpenter and Oliver Stone. Oh, I would go with John Carpenter too. John Carpenter is a great example, especially in his earlier work and his work through the 80s. The original Halloween, still one of my favorite horror movies. They Live, one of my favorite sort of cheesy action movies with Roddy Piper. And the Thing, just a lot of really good stuff from Carpenter. And then in the 90s, he kind of, creatively speaking, kind of dropped off the face of the earth. He did those two movies. Really close to each other. It was the remake of Village of the Damned and then In the Mouth of Madness, that I always get confused because it's been a long time since I've seen them, and in my mind they sort of merged into one movie. And I know that Christopher Reeve is in the Village of the Damned remake, and I know that Sam Neill is the main guy in the Mouth of Madness, but it's been so long since I've seen them, and they left such a slight impression on me that in my head I'm thinking, which one was that? Was that Village of the Damned? Or they seem like the same fucking movie to me. Duh 1177. Steve, I remember that you said that you detoured through deism before you fully accepted atheism for a while because you wanted the afterlife that religion offered you. I remember that for me, I accepted my mortality as far back as 5 or 6 years old. Do you think that the fear of death plays a significant role in people being so willing to accept religion? Or do you think that there is something more in play? Also, do you think that fear of death is normal and that my experience is abnormal? I haven't studied this in any real depth. I can only speak from my own experience. And from my own experience, fear of death was it. Fear of death was not just a significant part of it, it was the whole thing. I don't want to die. I don't want to not exist anymore. It's a very simple, very primal, and after a point, a very irrational fear. Because, I mean, I say irrational because, I mean, it's very irrational to want to preserve yourself and to preserve your life, but the ramifications of it render it irrational after a point. I mean, if everybody lived forever, society would never progress. The world would be filled with people, it just doesn't work. People have to die. Living things have to die. It's in their nature so that life in general can go on and continue to evolve and continue to succeed and flourish. It's a selfish fear and it's a selfish desire to want to live forever. And it was the one and only thing that motivated my reluctance to let go of a belief or a wish for the afterlife. That was it. And again, my own experience, you're accepting of mortality at 5 or 6. Yeah, that's very unusual because I was nowhere close to it when I was 5 and 6. When I was 5 and 6, I was crying and hugging my mother's leg, desperate for any hope of escaping death. I mean, I would think about someday I was going to die and I was going to cease to exist, and it would just terrify me, and it was incredibly upsetting. Beth Ann Swan, holy shit, what did you write fan fiction on? I wrote Batman fan fiction. I wrote a lot of it in high school, but I've also written a few stories here and there more recently. Just a couple years ago, I wrote some Batman stories. Fanfic is a nice writer's exercise. It not only satisfies the sort of nerdy, childish needs to control your favorite characters, but it's a good writing exercise because it allows you to work on things like plot and dialogue and character using pre-made materials. It's sort of like a practice. You can take characters that you already know, that you already have a really solid take on, that you didn't have to go through the trouble of creating, and you can write using those and write trying to stay true to them and trying to make a good story that honors those characters. And it's a good exercise in addition to being fun and just, enjoyable for completely nerdy reasons. R.R. Postal again. It depends what aspects of pro wrestling attract you to it. I can't look at it as anything but lowest common denominator of everything. Nothing frustrates me more than someone I respect who enjoys wrestling. At least I get religion. You like the matches? It's a fake muscle dudes. What part of the match do you like? Seriously, I really am not meaning to be a dick. What is at all interesting about the matches? I enjoy MMA matches because it's competition, but, well, even though pro wrestling and MMA exist in the same niche and even share certain desirable skills in common with each other, I think it's important to acknowledge that they are fundamentally very different things. Pro wrestling is a performance and MMA is a sport. And MMA is probably the closest we'll ever get to a legitimate sport that resembles what pro wrestling is presenting itself to be, the fictional sport that pro wrestling is presenting itself as. Pro wrestling is a performance, it's a form of theater, it's a very low, very basic form of theater. I admit that readily. I don't go to a pro wrestling match expecting the same sort of thing that I would get from going to a play or going to see a film, but at the same time it is a form of theater, and it does, and a good wrestling match tells a story. A good wrestling match has, in the classic example, it has a baby face and a heel, a good guy and a bad guy, a hero and a villain. They're struggling with each other. It has psychology. The moves that the wrestlers do are done for a reason. They make sense within the context of the match. A villain might have a finish that involves putting the opponent into a painful submission hold on the leg, so he will concentrate his offense on the opponent's leg. Or they might book the match so that someone receives an accidental injury during the match so that the opponent can then focus their attack on that. I mean, there are all sorts of ways you can lay out a wrestling match to give it a sense of flow and a sense of story and almost a plot, a very basic, rudimentary plot. So that's what attracts me to it. And you know what else? You talk about it being lowest common denominator, and I can't really argue with you that much about that. One of the other things is that it's fun to just laugh at kind of the silly trappings of it. Like, think of all of the silly names that they give to wrestling shows. Like there's WWE Raw. I mean, what the fuck does that even mean? And SmackDown. And then, you know, back when WCW still existed, they had Monday Nitro, and then they had another, what was the other show that they had, WCW, that was on Thursdays? That's it. Thunder. Yeah, and in addition to answering my question, it also means that it's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Benjamin Burnwriter, do you feel naked or incomplete when you do not feel the pen at your collarbone? No, I'm okay without it. I mean, I'm not going to take it off now just to show you that I'm okay without it. I've got nothing to prove to you people. Khachaturian Lick, Steve, will you read us one of your fanfics, please? No, I don't have time to read one to you right now, but I will leave a link in the description box to where you can go to read some of them. How about that? JVC Cam 96, Steve, you're a nerd, right? Who is your favorite superhero? Please say Superman. Okay, Superman. But see, now you'll never know whether I honestly meant that or whether I just said that to be nice because you asked me to. My Thousand Faces, another DC Film Universe question. You're given the reins to the DC Film Universe, like Whedon and Feige over at Marvel, but must work within the direction they've started with Man of Steel. How do you go about it? I make Man of Steel 2 just about Superman, no Batman, and I make it about Lex Luthor repairing the destroyed Metropolis and Superman confronting, recognizing, and then realizing that he has to atone for the part he played in the destruction of Metropolis. That's what I would do to start with. John the Great, what drugs have you ever taken, and what impact have they had on your life? Other than alcohol, I've never taken any recreational drugs at all, so they haven't had any impact on my life. And alcohol I use in moderation. I'm not really a super big drinker, and I don't drink to excess very much. So other than a few rough mornings spaced throughout the latter half of my life, really alcohol hasn't affected me that much either. David Landon, Steve, I enjoy some poetry like Edgar Allan Poe or The Charge of the Light Brigade. Poems that tell a story through poetry I enjoy. But a lot of poetry I find to be little more than pretentious sophistry. Your thoughts? Yes, I think pretentious sophistry is a perfect description of a lot of poetry, especially modern poetry. Modern poetry is often pretentious and very, very like self-serving, self-involved. I don't like a lot of especially modern poetry, but then some of it, yeah, like you say, some of it I really, really love. Killer1807. Hi Steve, do you think a 39-year-old should still be playing games on his Xbox 360? I think a 39-year-old should be beyond giving a fuck about what other people think about him playing his Xbox 360. That's what I think. Ben Glasky, hey Steve, is it alright that I still want to vomit when people try talking about Man of Steel like it was some kind of Citizen Kane of comic book movies? Oh yes, that's perfectly alright. And Ben, listen to me. You don't have to justify crying or vomiting or whatever your response to Man of Steel was to anybody, okay? You were the victim. You were the victim. You don't owe anybody anything. You don't owe anybody any explanations. Latius Dita, here's something for the lightning round. What is your favorite kind of soup? Chicken corn soup. I got attached to it as a very young kid. My mother used to make this beautiful chicken corn soup. That's my favorite. PC pancake. Ooh, would you rather have a lightsaber or a phaser? The Millennium Falcon or an Enterprise shuttle? A Bacta tank or a holodeck? I would rather have a phaser, an Enterprise shuttle, and a holodeck. I'm sorry, Star Wars is great, but in terms of technology, I would like to have Star Trek wins hands down every time. I'm sorry. The Millennium Falcon is cool and all, but what do I want to be driving around space in? Not the fucking Millennium Falcon. So that is it for the lightning round. That is it for the questions this week. Before I get out of here, as always, I have a shout out to give, and it's another really deserving YouTube channel. The shout out this week goes to Karen S, aka Streetcar52. That's her username. Karen S. You might have seen that Bawd to Bits gave her a shout out recently. That's actually, I think that's how I found her too, from Bawd to Bits' shout out. So thanks, Bawd, for bringing Karen S to my attention and to other people's attention. And if you didn't hear about her from Bawd to Bits, goddamn it, you're hearing about her from me right now. She has a great YouTube channel, still very early in its development, not very many subscribers. I checked this morning, she has like 600 some subscribers. So get your ass over there, check out her stuff, subscribe if you like it. She has a series that she just started a couple of weeks ago on presuppositional apologetics, which is always a very hot topic among we big-mouthed internet atheists. And she's doing a really good job with it so far. It's very interesting. I think there are 3 of them up at this point, and I think there are more to come with that. But a really good channel. She mirrors some things, and she also does a lot of her own content. So check it out. Highly recommended. Karen S. Well, that is it for me this week. I will be back next week to do this all over again, provided, of course, that you guys ask me some questions that I can answer next week, because for me to do this at all, you have to ask. So please leave a comment on this video with your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly and frivolous. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can next time. And until next time, take care and have a good week.